Let me go get it.
We're gonna, you're probably gonna laugh, but we do our little introduction. It's pretty cheesy, but we love doing it.
Oh man, I'm an
Special.
actor. There ain't
Remember,
nothing cheesy to
I
me.
used to
Oh,
make
yeah.
legit films, so I still have my iCam
Oh
legit
man,
clapboard.
you're
There
gonna
you
make me
go.
cry. You're gonna make me
There you go.
tear
Should
up.
I say it?
Are you ready?
And action. Welcome to the Paper Trail podcast, where everything has a paper trail. So we follow that, and that's how we get our content.
Sir.
Season 2, episode 2, right? Is that
Yep.
right? And
Season
today
two,
is a
episode
special
two.
day. It is a
Very
special day,
special.
season 2. Last week, last episode, we told you guys we had some good things down the road, and we have a great thing today. Make sure you're listening. This is the episode that you do not want to miss.
This is the golden
Probably want to
nugget.
watch it 3 times because we have Professor Dan on the call with us.
He's over here
Um,
for me.
he is down for me. He's up for for Grant. He's probably going to be up there when the video's posted. Professor Dan is just an amazing professor to Grant. Actually,
Yep.
I'm going to actually let Grant talk about
Take this one.
how they met and who Professor Dan is to him.
Well, first of all, this is it's like an episode of The Twilight Zone for me. It's a little surreal to have both of my mentors in one call. This is awesome. Professor Dan was my professor for telecommunications and networking at UTSA. And I was very nervous about his class because networking is very difficult and not very easily graspable, if that's a words. But he made it great. I got an A in his class. So he's here to tell us today who he is and his story because it's an amazing story. Professor Dan, the floor is yours.
Floor is yours. So, Professor, we wanted to ask you. I mean, people would love to hear this when we talk about networking. And by the way, networking ranges from just a logical idea that we kind of learn in school down to the physical. So think of like actually wiring a cable. Professor Dan is your guy. He can tell you exactly how to do that. But we're
Working at my
curious,
desk.
Professor, how did you get into networking? We want to kind of go a little further back in your life. There's so many people like myself who want to get into or have, at one point wanted to get into something. And
Mhm.
we've all asked the question, where do I start? How do I do this? So I'd like to know, how did you find out about networking, and how did you know where to go and how to get into networking?
Well, I mean, Pap, it's actually a great question, and it's actually a very nostalgic question for me because my technical career in life started when my father brought home a green screen computer from AT&T, and of course, I did as a 9, 10-year-old, what anybody would do is I quickly figured out how do I play games on this thing? How can I use this device differently than an Atari or something like that? So, to make a long story short, in regards to my gaming career, it really quickly turned into okay, you got to install games in DOS and then in the early Windows days. And so how do you configure Microsoft operating systems so your games work, right? They work the right way. And so the curiosity of doing so, I like to say, I know this is a very unofficial claim, but I like to say that I think I was one of the earliest I had one of the earliest conversations with a representative from Microsoft that didn't cost any money, where I was able to configure memory settings in DOS so that the optimized environment for my DOS games, right, were, I took advantage of it. So
And just to
I
let you guys know, DOS, I'm sure you guys might know what DOS is, but if you don't know, have you ever seen the movies? It's like the computer has like this big black box and you just type into the box. That's DOS. That
That's
like there is
DOS.
no clicking mouse buttons. It's only typing into a black box, and That's
With the was that
it.
the green letters?
It's a badge of honor. Absolutely. So anyway, and as I just followed this path of technical curiosity and just really, you know, wanting my gaming experience to be as optimized and as enjoyable as it could be, that kind of led me into an early career, um, right when I got out of high school, doing, for a very small company, just doing really kind of anything technical. I was kind of like part gopher, part level two, part networker on a very basic level. I mean, I actually wired, I was taught how to wire outlets in the office that I worked at when I was 18 years old. And it just was absolutely fascinating. And after doing that for a couple of years, I got a job at a extremely significant insurance provider, financial services provider in San Antonio. They provide financial services to the military.
Oh yeah, they're big.
Wow.
They're
Very big,
big.
very big. So my first job there was doing basically like level three hardware and software technical support. And so as I was doing this across a 15,000 person company, it's like I would refer back to this, very, very basic and elementary network knowledge that I did when I got out of high school at that first job at that small company. And it just became like, okay, after fixing hardware and software problems, it's like my network exposure just kind of like started to like, I call it like boiling water. It starts
Yep.
to boil a little bit faster, starts to boil a little bit bigger. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, I need to configure TCP/IP settings on this. This computer is not on the network anymore. So do I have to call somebody? Okay, I would call somebody maybe one time, but then I would have the access to be able to fix it myself. And so you just start traversing along this path. And then slowly but surely, it got to where I was like, man, there's a network team here. And I'm just absolutely fascinated by how this works. And all of my exposure from hardware and software support, and we were referred to as the SWAT team, like the special forces. If the help desk couldn't figure out a problem, they would call us. And so once you kind of start mastering that in a way, you start to see like, man, and Pap, this is really kind of a microcosm to life, I suppose, that you feel like you're climbing this ladder and you get right above the clouds and you're like, okay, I'm done climbing. But then you
Get
look up and you're
through the
like,
clouds.
oh,
Oh wait, that was just the beginning.
it's
Yeah.
just the beginning, Grant. There's miles of ladder to go. And so that's what's just so freaking awesome and just is just so exciting is that you realize it's such a cliche, but the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Hmm.
Yep.
And
I
so yeah, and
I
so Pat,
love how
that's what
you
exactly, and that's what inspired my early love of networking is just how do things work? You start climbing this ladder, you start advancing, you're like, how does this work? How do we do this? How do we get to the internet? How do things all talk to each other? And so that's just the early stages for me.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, I love how you just combine two concepts, right? So the first is that it is not a fast track. You cannot fast track yourself into networking. Um, I fell into that trap, in my early days of college. I'm sure many people out there fell into the trap of like, maybe I can just, watch this YouTube video and fast track my way into it. The second thing you kind of brought into is, well, we know you can't fast track. You have to take the slow route if you want to be good on a comprehensive level,
Hmm.
but you also need to enjoy it. And that's the other part where you're like, what about this? Oh, I could learn this, or I could do this, I could do that. If you didn't have the drive to enjoy what you were learning, you wouldn't have taken the time and taken the effort that you took to learn. And I think that's a not only is it a real important lesson, but it's something that excites me, especially in cybersecurity. I mean, I've been studying for years cybersecurity, and um, even now, I kind of walk into my job and I'm like, I know nothing. Like I have no idea what's going on. Sometimes, like I feel like I'm just starting over again. But in reality, with the basics, yeah, I know the basics. But once you pass that,
Hmm.
there's a new world. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with networking. Once you get the basics down, okay, I know everything. Nope. Now there's a new world. Oh, and by the way, we just came up with new standards too, by the way. You have to learn
But
that.
Pat, that's the beauty of it all.
Absolutely.
That's why we do it, right? It's not only and look, we're all human beings. We like that recognition from others, right? We like to be identified as a subject matter expert or as someone who quote unquote knows their blank. Um, but it's that looking at that guy or girl in the mirror and saying, that dude's bad. You know, I mean, that dude knows what he's talking about. And that's just that's what's so wonderful. I will say this is once, you know, it's just so it doesn't have to be this way. But in my case, I was so fortunate to have exposure to networking and networking concepts to know how to support my users and how to support the business before I got interested into, oh, hey, they have certifications for this.
Mhm.
So what was cool for me is I got to bring on the job experience of networking into certifications so that it was, you know, if you hop into a virtual lab and you're configuring equipment and you're doing things, sometimes you're going to ask yourself, well, why am I doing this?
Yep.
What's the point? What dots am I connecting here? And so, lucky for me, I was able to connect those dots in a real practical environment, in a real business case sense, so that it just was just a natural course for me. And
Yeah.
that's why it was so valuable in my case.
That's that's a that's a great point there. I want to ask this question. It might deviate from the main topic, but we'll get back to the
We'll
topic
circle back.
shortly after this question. But I want to ask a question of we get a lot of questions on, should I get this certification? Is it worth getting this certification? Where I usually say yes, it is helpful to get a certification. The issue, especially from the workforce, the issue that I run into is when I interview some of these guys, they know everything from a book perspective from the certification, but when they actually are ready to apply what they learned in the certification, it's like they have no idea what they're doing.
Right.
And so the question I want to ask you is, how would you best prepare for a job in that sense? Would you go for the certification route? Would you go for just the hands-on, or would you kind of mix both?
Well, I mean, Pap, I think it's important, honestly, to balance both. I think, you know, when you if you look in my early days with the people I used to work with, we didn't get certifications early on. Certifications, the rise and the importance of certifications kind of came later in our careers. And so we were lucky, I guess you could say, because we had that practical experience. We knew why we were doing something and what the business purpose was. And so we were fortunate. But one thing we quickly realized is those certifications give you that street cred, right? That nobody can question. The
Mhm.
first certification I ever got was an MCSE, a Microsoft Certified System Engineer. So you remember that one. And so that was so easy, and not easy to get, so to speak, but it was an easy choice because it was like, well, dang, I've worked with Microsoft concepts and technologies my whole life, Windows and the Microsoft limited networking view. And so I, my buddies and I, we looked at each other and said, we know all this stuff, but if we just go and we get that certification, you know, we're going to be looked at when we go apply or when we go interview, we're going to be looked at differently than if we just put those skills on the resume. So, what I think is important, and because this is such a chicken or the egg type of conversation. Well, how can I get the experience if I don't have the certification that gets me the job that gets me the experience, right? But I can't get that job without a certification. I think what's extremely important is to get and pursue the certification, because honestly, when you're studying for something and it's so intensely, it's a certification is an intense pressure-filled type of journey, right? It's kind of like training for a marathon. Only that once the marathon's over, the marathon's over. But when you get your certification, you keep that knowledge with you in theory. But I think it's important as you're studying for the test and you're trying to retain this knowledge, that you're finding ways, whether they're online labs, where maybe if you're going to do something, maybe you're going to do a low-level Cisco certification like CCNA, which is kind of the entry-level Cisco networking certification. You find some kind of environment that you're doing practical cases. You're doing scenarios. Why am I doing this? Why does this because if I just told you to make sure this switch talks to this switch, or that this switch can access the internet, or something, something networking, practical use, you may ask yourself, well, why am I doing this? Well, you find some practical uses. And you want to know something that I think is the easiest thing to do? Go talk to people about their networking problems at home. Everybody has a home network, right? But not everybody does that home network correctly. You know what I tell my students? Go talk to your mom and dad. Go talk to grandma and grandpa, right? How's their Wi-Fi network, right? Are they secure? Are they using, I don't know. Are they using switches? Are they using firewall services? I mean, what are they doing at home? And so use your certification progress. Look for these opportunities. And, I could talk about this for 10 years, but use this knowledge to help people. And as you're helping people with their home networks, or you're learning about their home networks, or you're like, hey, I'm studying for certification, and I know how my home network is set up. Well, how's yours? Because the more I see, the more I can take with me and stuff in my travel bag of experience, right? And so you need to figure out, what do I do? What do people do with these concepts that I'm learning along the journey of certification? Because most of this stuff, and this is another reason why I love this stuff so much, it really truly has practical use in our everyday lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I could bring
Anyway,
it back actually to what you were talking about earlier, is I started off in the journey. I really wanted a Shelby GT350R, and I was like, you know what? I'll take my Security Plus, I'll get my degree, and I'll go get my Shelby. And as I'm studying for the Security Plus, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I need to roll it back a little bit. So I was like, okay, let me start off with the A plus, and then kind of like you along that journey, I kept finding more and more and more stuff about networking and security and computers. And then the other day I was talking to Pap about Jython. I've never heard of Jython. And I'm just learning more and more. It's like I don't even care about the car anymore. I just want to be the best. So it's like it's along that journey of doing certifications, you kind of open doors that you didn't know existed to just learning more and more stuff, and like you said, climbing that ladder, and think when you, oh, well, I found the top, and oh wait, there's another door, and you keep going up and up.
And Grant, and I have a quick, very perfect story to just completely hammer that point home. When I started to achieve these Cisco certifications, we learned really quick in the Cisco world, because the big insurance company I worked at was a Cisco shop. And so as we realized that the Cisco certifications were generally referred to as the industry standard of networking certifications, we learned that the CCIE, the Cisco Certified Internet Networking Expert, was the top dog of certifications. You get that, and you are basically, they'll throw roses in front of you wherever you walk, right? I mean, you'll be like a king. Well, as I started to get the low-level ones to kind of work my way into that, I met someone from Cisco who was a triple CCIE. And I remember looking at him like, holy, because once you know what it takes to get one, to see someone have gotten three, it just is like you said, it's like, why would you do that? You don't need three. One is incredible enough, but that's that whole I'm not going to be satisfied with this, right? I want to do something in this field, right? That's unique. I want to be one of a kind. And that's why we do this. It's, that guy probably didn't make any more money with his second CCIE than he did with one, or maybe his third versus second. But I can assure you, he walks around thinking, "Yep,
I'm him.
I'm
I'm
him."
him.
Exactly. And there's not many hymns,
There's not
just so you
many
know.
He needs a shirt that just says "I'm
I'm
him."
him.
Yeah, lots of people
yeah,
say that, but when you look at him, yeah, you're like, oh my gosh. So, but that's honestly the beauty of it, Grant, is that we love, you put another notch in your belt, you put another accomplishment on your wall. Yeah, they're just that, but you know what it took to get that,
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
You know how hard it was. And circling back to your path, this is kind of I get the question a lot of, okay, I'm a cybersecurity major, and I'm pretty sure that maps in the CompTIA world to Security Plus. So, but what about the others? And what I like to tell people, and I certainly refer to you a lot, but what I say is, I say, yes, I agree with you that the Security Plus is the end game. But that path of doing A plus to Network plus to Security plus, that is not throwaway knowledge.
Nope.
And you can be a better security person, right? By being good at the hardware, software, by being good at the networking. You need those things because it's not like, well, I don't need geometry if I'm going to do algebra. It doesn't really matter. Those are two separate things. Well, this is all algebra. It's just different pieces and, puzzles, and it all goes together. And the more you know, not only do you become a more effective person in the cyber world, whatever it is your role is, but you know what the bad guys and girls are doing. You understand it better. You know from top to bottom, because, pray for us if we ever get asked the question, well, how did they do that? You don't want to say, I don't know. That's
Yep.
not who we want to be. We
No,
want to
absolutely.
answer that question.
And Pap was
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
inspiration for this one. So for getting all those certifications, I was like, Pap, and he's helped me. So
Yeah, so I'm happy you guys mentioned it, because even I got my Security Plus. Man, I think it was like 6 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but even when I was getting my Security Plus, I wasn't just studying to get a certification. I was trying to learn the material. So
Right. Big
one of the
difference.
things that had just come out when I was studying for the Security Plus, one of the things that had just come out was WPA3 for home Wi-Fi. So home Wi-Fi uses WPA stands for Wi-Fi protected access. Home Wi-Fi just basically has its own set of protected services. So think of things like encryption and other stuff like that. For those who aren't technical, when you log into your Wi-Fi, there's some protections that happen. But the WPA3 had just came out. It was a new thing, and everyone's like, "Oh, we got to turn our home network to WPA3." And then a news article comes out, and it's like WPA3 is susceptible to Dragon Blood, which is a specific attack that targets the handshake that WPA3 does. So the handshake is very similar to like a TCP connection, but Dragon Blood is pretty much it's an injection. It allows your device to pretend to be the receiving device, and then you're basically telling the Wi-Fi, uh, the the router at this point, because there's a bunch of connections that happen. You're basically saying, "Hey, I'm actually the person that needs to have access to this Wi-Fi, not the actual person." And that was on a Security Plus, so it was so
Oh.
big it actually made it to the Security Plus.
Oh, wow.
And so the question that I ended up getting was, why isn't WPA3 secure? And the answer was because of the Dragon Blood attack or something like that. But when I when I was studying for Security Plus, I saw it pop up in the study guide. So I had bought the official book. And I was like, what is this Dragon Blood? So I look at it and it's like, uh, it is a way to, it's almost like a man in the middle, almost. Like you
Mhm.
inject during a handshake.
Yep.
And so I'm like, what is the handshake? And I had to learn what that is. So even now, when I look at WPA3, um, you, it's basically, if you know how the handshake works, like especially my Wi-Fi now, I use WPA3 now, but if you know how the handshake works, you will know that you can actually combine WPA3 with like a different like protocol that could hash a value or encrypt it so that even if a device jumps in the middle, there's another check that happens. And if that device doesn't have that second check, there's no actually getting into the Wi-Fi. So while people were saying, "Hey, don't jump to WPA3, it's insecure," I was saying, "No, you could jump to it. You just need to know how to configure it to make it secure." And so that's was a big idea for me of like it's not just about Security Plus, but it's about how are these things working? Because if it really was insecure, then it would just be across the board, like wipe the board with it. But WPA3 still exists on routers, and well, they're like kind of router gateways because today's routers are gateways, which is weird, but
And
but
Pat, what you've just done is you have just wonderfully highlighted the cybersecurity problem facing businesses across this world. Hey, let's go online. We kind of know a little bit that we're supposed to configure, and then all of a sudden you're the subject of
Ransomware.
of a ransomware or some other compromise or something because you didn't do it the right way. And that's the point. It's not just going live and going high tech.
Going to the
You,
cloud.
you've got to know what you're doing. The devil is in the details. And there's one of my good buddies from the old work days. He was a pararescue jumper in the Air Force. He told me they had a saying, and it was "Stay alert, stay alive." And so you have to know what you're doing. You've got the intricacies of how to protect people. That's why it's not enough to be great. It's not enough to know the basics. Yes, the basics are important, the fundamentals, as we call it, right? Good sports athletes, basketball players, they've got to know the fundamentals, but it's keeping the fundamentals with you, but building upon those with those advanced skills. It's the same way in cyber. And you just perfectly just highlighted right there. Just because WPA3 has there's some danger in it, it doesn't mean we can't use it the right way and use it for good, right? You just got to know what you're doing.
Absolutely. So sorry, can we circle back? I wanted to get Professor Dan how you became a professor. You had just gotten this job at with the SWAT team.
Well, Grant, after serving my time figuratively and literally at that insurance provider or financial services provider to the military, oddly enough, a good friend of mine that I met in college started his own company, and he asked me to quote unquote, handle all my computer shit for me. Uh, and I said, "Oh, I didn't know that was an official job." Uh, so really what he was asking was, he knew that he could trust me to care about him and to care about his business. Probably could have hired somebody a little bit technically better than me, but nobody who cared more for him than I did. So I did that for 13 years and was fortunate enough to help him grow this business into literally $1 billion company. And so he sold it and I retired. And then I realized that retirement really sucks when you have kids in middle school and in high school. That's not retirement. That's nothing to do with retirement. So I wanted to go back and be passionate about, or to try to teach what I was passionate about in school and what really resonated with me. And looking back on my career and realizing the role that networking played, I knew that UTSA had a networking class, and I'm going to say this very maturely because I mean absolutely no disrespect at all to what I call career professors, because I've told you, Harrison, Grant, a million times that we need career professors. We don't have college without career professors, but I lived the networking world, and it made me who I was. And I wanted to teach networking, I guess I'm not going to say the right way. I wanted to teach it my way with the passion that I was fortunate enough to experience, and try to instill in my students the significance of needing networking, okay, for your cyber or your whatever information systems degree you're getting. And so I was lucky enough to have some contacts that helped me start some conversations with the College of Business at UTSA, and I was able to parlay that into a position where I do special projects, but I also teach the networking class that I myself took in 1995 from my dear, dear, dear mentor, God rest his soul, Dr. Glenn Dietrich, someone who I think about every day. And so I teach the networking class with a influence and a nod to the way he did things and the way he taught me, but also with my practical real world experience, and try to teach people. I told you this, and I tell all my students this. My goal in that class is twofold. It's the only two goals I have. I want that class to be my students' favorite class in their entire college career. And I want them to be the best networkers walking around certainly in the entire school, but hopefully beyond that. So
Yeah,
I
well,
try to
man.
focus. I try to focus on the things that are most important, and I try to have fun with it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When I know, and I hear from Grant, or I heard from Grant especially, he's like, I did my first twisted pair, and I'm like, did you did you just Google it and decide to just randomly do it once? He's like, no, I have a networking class, and we literally did it. I've never heard of that. I definitely did not do that in college. My first twisted pair was when I had worked for a startup, one of my first IT jobs. It was like help desk. But because it was a startup, we did more than help desk. Um, and it now, I think about it now, I'm like, man, if many people had that opportunity, the experience that we get and we learn from that one simple thing goes a long way. So I want to ask this question. I want to ask, what gave you the idea of teaching in that way where the students can get hands-on and also learn from the book as well? I think that idea is, if I had a professor like that, I would have learned a lot more in a lot less time doing that way. But it seems that you're the only person I've met so far who has done that. So it's not a thing that's like common. It's a unique thing, and it takes a level of creativity. So how did you come up with that idea?
Well, Pap, it's actually the beginning of a long journey for me, because I actually want to turn that class into the perfect combination of book versus hands-on, because I truly feel that if you're reinforcing the concepts from the textbook with the hands-on, I think that is the most optimal. Now, with Grant being in my class, and I've told him this multiple times, I'm on this journey to try to make the perfect networking course for my students. I take that Ethernet cable making lab or exercise that we do in class. To me, it kind of serves two purposes. One, it gets you the hands-on, and it's fun. It's fun to do, and there's value in doing it. It just really makes me so proud to see the students care so much about completing the cable. But it's also, Pap, a symbolic thing. It's a way to tell my students, yes, we're dealing with a physical cable, layer one of the OSI model, right? But it's figurative and literal. It's literal and figurative. A way to say there is nothing we won't do. There's nothing as a networker that you're going to look at somebody else and say, well, I don't do that, or I don't know how to do that. We've got to have everything in our toolbox. And sometimes you just don't have the luxury of running down to Amazon and picking up an Ethernet cable and replacing it. What if it's one of those long runs that goes all the way through the wall or the ceiling, right? And you're thinking, oh man, the jack just came off of the end, and if I could just cut it and re-terminate it, it'd be good. But oh no, I don't know how to do that. Well, true networkers, we don't say that. It's we want to own it all. We want to be the answer. We want to be, the technology 911, right? And so I am so proud of how that exercise has turned out. Um, I got a lot of doubt from fellow professors about doing it. They thought that the students wouldn't enjoy it. They thought that it was beneath the students. But I've got to tell you, Pap, and I think it's fair to say this, in my 3 semesters, I think everybody has really enjoyed it. I think that they've grasped, obviously, the hands-on concept of just getting your hands on something, but also, hey, this is something I need to know how to do. And I get a lot of students that want to take their cables home with them. And to me, that pretty much says it all right there.
I'm
Oh yeah.
sorry. The reason I'm laughing so hard is I remember specifically you put on like Native American
Oh my,
music and we're going back to our roots. I was like, is this
going
a
back to
yoga
your root.
class?
I Pap and Grant, let me just say really quickly that it was delicate when I first did that, because I think I wanted to guard against somebody think that I was disrespecting, Native American and heritage and music, and it's absolutely quite the opposite. I'll never forget, I was traveling through an area in Washington State called Snoqualmie Pass. And my uncle was flipping through radio stations, because you get to periods where you're limited in what, he didn't have a Sirius XM. I mean, we were limited to whatever was on the AM FM radio. And I'll never forget, he turned it to a channel and it was Native American tribal war hymns.
Yeah.
And I sat there. I wish he could have taken a picture of me, because I believe I was just sitting in the car like this. I mean, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And so when I thought about doing the cables, it's like, you're making Ethernet cables, you're going back to your roots. It's like staring at a campfire, right? It's that beginning of mankind feeling. And so there's nothing better than true tribute Native American, chanting and music. It's just so rhythmic. I call it medicine for the soul, but it's the perfect complement to making cables. I wonder if someone's going to go upon their journey someday and they're ready to make a cable and they're going to put on their iPhone or whatever Native American music as they're making the cable. Because if they do that, I've done my job.
It's so funny because
I might, hey, I might actually have to do that.
Oh,
That's,
there's nothing like it.
it's really
it's
funny because I messed up actually. Our group messed up when we like tested it. And you said if you mess up, you lose points. So I was like, oh shit, like cut it off, hide it, and let's just do it again.
But
So I
that was
slipped it,
good.
like I was ready to swallow the broken piece that we messed up on. But I was like, I'm gonna put it in my pocket, and it still sits
uh,
on my desk to this day. It's here on my desk, and I look at it every day. I'm like, dang,
Grant,
almost.
that was just a way to apply some artificial pressure,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
To crank up the heat a little bit.
sorry, what were you gonna say, Pap? I didn't mean to
No,
cut you off
no,
there.
that's funny. No, I was gonna say man, so going back to roots stuff. My wife and I, we get into this thing where we try to save money by DIY. Um, and sometimes she kind of forgets that technology is my passion. Even if I don't know something, it's my passion. And so I built her a computer, and I connected the computers that we build. I usually connect it to Ethernet because it runs a lot faster than Wi-Fi at times. Um, and I think she like tripped or something and kind of ripped the Ethernet cable out from the point where it terminates, the plastic piece that you just showed Grant. And she came in, she was a little upset about it, kind of like, hey, my Ethernet cable is kind of broken. We need to buy a new one. And so my response was, we just need to buy a plastic piece. We could re-terminate that. All we have to do is cut around it, connect the colors just how they're supposed to be in the right order, punch down, and we're good to go. So
Set.
having that little knowledge goes a long way, not just at work, at home. If you want to save money on an Ethernet cable, like Professor said, there's not always an Amazon warehouse to run to. You don't, what if it's like, 2 in the morning, you're working on a school assignment or work and your Ethernet cable rips? How are you gonna connect to the internet? So things like that are just really helpful. The little things that we just
It,
overlook.
it absolutely is, Pat, but it's also that mindset of, as a true networker, I need to know as much as I can. I need to have a variety of skills. I need to have multiple techniques to solve a problem. When you actually go, I don't know if they do this anymore, but in the old days of the CCIE, because it was a two-part exam, you would have to take a written test. And then once you passed the written test, on another day, you would schedule your lab and you would go and take this two-part lab. I don't know if they do it like that anymore, but certainly in the old days, you would build this lab and then you would go home or go back to your hotel room at night, and then they would break stuff and you would have to come in day two and fix what they broke. But the thing is that was so important about day one is you couldn't just come in with one way to approach a configuration. They may say, you have to do this, but you cannot use this method. And so people would flip out like, oh my gosh, this is the only way I know. Well, there's other ways. Now you're asking yourself, why do they make me do it that way? They want you to know a variety of ways. So that's what's so symbolic to me about making cables is, you could minimize it and you could say, oh, if I can't buy a cable or whatever, but there are lots of times where, like you said, Pat, cutting the end of the cable off and just re-terminating it, it's the quickest, it's the cheapest. And, what's better than sitting back and going, you know that feeling.
Just
We've
did it.
all we've all had that feeling. So anyway.
I just did it, man.
I just did. You're not him, but you did it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
we
exactly.
can only dream someday.
So one of the questions, and this might sound a little off topic, but it actually connects right back in. One of the questions that I get a lot is when students are looking into cybersecurity, they usually will ping me or message me or so and say, "Hey, what should I learn for cybersecurity? Should I learn how to code, or should I dive into networking?" In reality, I tell them that they need to know both. Like, you don't need to be, a programmer. You don't need to be like a software developer, but you do need to understand how to read code. That's what's important for cybersecurity. But the type of attack. So if you think about all possible cybersecurity attacks, there's physical attacks, and then there's network attacks. That's it. Like, if you want to attack a web application, that is, you need to be able to get into a network for that, some kind of network. If that's a public network, if that's a private network, you still need to get into some kind of networking related, we'll say, protocol in this case, in order to attack that application. You need a connection to the internet. If you want to, if you want to attack a company's internal systems, you need to be able to access that network. Um, so regardless, if you want to send a phishing email to somebody, you can't send a phishing email if you can't connect to the internet, for one. Two, if you send a phishing email, what happens? Usually they download a file and their computer reaches out to your C2 server. If their network's not configured to do that, you're not getting access to their system because it's not going to reach out. So I mean, I can go on and on, but the only other kind of attack that has nothing to do with network is if I physically walked into a building and just plugged in my laptop to a server, thing, like a physical attack. Um, or maybe just walked in and talked to somebody and convinced them to give me some money. I don't know. But but
That's
it's
fun too.
That's what.
right. But the big thing goes right. So and the question then becomes, well, how important is networking when it comes to cybersecurity? and that's a question I wanted to ask you and get your thoughts on, because I think networking is, when it comes to learning a coding language, you can get by in cybersecurity without knowing how to code. You can't get by without knowing basic networking.
No, Pap, I mean, I agree. I mean, on those two concepts that you talked about right there, I look at I look at coding, and talking to Grant, offline actually just recently,
Mhm.
it's helpful to know coding because that helps you develop shortcuts or it helps you automate things. Like that's a tool that you could use for making life better or easier, or maybe talking the language if you need to. But I think when it comes to networking, I think, Hap, you just kind of touched on it a little bit, and I don't think it's. I think I could just drop the mic right here and just walk away if I simply said, "How are you going to protect a network if you don't know how it works?" Okay, so I will tell a very quick story, and I believe I've shared this with Grant previously, but I'm going to tell a very, very quick story. When I was working for my college friend and I was doing all of his computer stuff for him, um, my job, my friend owned a bunch of fast food restaurants, and so one of my responsibilities was controlling the technology in all of these restaurants. Well, one day, in the middle of my day, I get this email, and this wasn't "I'm the Prince of Nigeria" email. I'm going to send you trillions of dollars. This was a little bit scarier, and I've gotten lots of, fake scary emails, but this was the best one I ever got because it was so targeted and it was so relevant, if you will. And without going into it, it was basically like, I have basically uploaded code to the firewalls in every one of your restaurants, and you're going to pay me what I'm asking for in Bitcoin, or I'm going to take every one of your restaurants offline and you will never be able to get them back. And so, what I had to do after just like, okay, this is fake, isn't it? But then I thought, well, I get paid to really think this through and make sure. So I had to go through the entire networking path to say, is what this person saying, was this possible for him to have done? How would he have done it? If I was him and I was trying to attack me this way, how would I have done it? And what's likely? And so by really, really relying on my network knowledge and really, really thinking of how things work, and also seeing how much he was asking for in Bitcoin, which was absolutely ridiculously low, that was like, come on, man. You could have asked me for like $50,000 or 100,000, and you might have had me. He asked for like $3,000. But anyway,
What?
it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. It was the most relevantly like scary email because it was not crazy. It seemed factual, and I had to really, really think about how networking worked and how my restaurants were set up and how the networking in the restaurants worked. So I think that I tell my students this, Pap, all the time. And Grant, I know you remember. I tell them that this is not, biology 101. You have to take the knowledge that you learn in this class with you. And the more you can take with you, the better you will be in the cyber world, the more effective you will be at preventing attacks or understanding attacks, or if this is your cup of tea, creating the attacks, whatever it is that you're doing. But you've got to take that networking knowledge with you. It is fundamental. You cannot protect a network. You cannot understand how to protect a network unless you understand basic networking. You understand TCP/IP. You understand, how do I hop from place to place? How do I get there? How is the routing? How is the subnetting set up? I have to know that. And a lot of times you're going to think, you know, how would I how would I attack me so that I know how to possibly defend me? And then you get into the whole getting external people to do that, to validate, your defenses and all that stuff. But it's not a throwaway topic. It's something that you will rely upon and build upon. And that's why I really drive it home to my students. And I hope that provides some really, really significant relevance as they're experiencing.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. I mean, we I'm sure you've gotten this question. I'm sure everyone has gotten a question like this of uh someone's got my IP address. Help. They're gonna take over my home Wi-Fi or something like that. Uh, and I usually ask them two questions. One is, do you know how a router slash gateway works? Because they're usually one and the same. The second question is, why do you think that attackers send emails to try to convince you to download something? Why wouldn't they just attack your network? And that's because they can't attack your network.
Right,
Home router gateways by default do not listen on any port, but the only port they listen on is their own internal network, but that's after you have authenticated. So if I shared my public IP, you couldn't connect to my computer by default. I'd have to open up
right,
a listener on my computer for you to be able to connect. Now, even if I open up a listener, you still can't connect from the outside. You can only connect inside. I have to then forward that listener from my gateway to go inside to my network, which means you have to be very deliberate if you're going to get your home network hacked. And that just shows, like, if you know at least some networking, you would know enough to go into your router, start snooping around, saying, "Oh, what is port forwarding, for example?"
right, exactly.
Okay, well, okay, this makes sense. If I don't have port forwarding enabled, then how does my router know to start forwarding things, forwarding traffic to, like, from outside in, inside, things like that? It's like, well, internally, it routes things internally, but once you leave the network, it doesn't, if something comes in, it doesn't know where to put that. So it just kind of drops it. If once you leave the network, it knows how to route you to a public service or so, but the other way around, you kind of need some kind of forwarding service to tell it, hey, I need it to forward inside a network to this specific computer, and then this computer can respond, kind of thing.
Right.
All
And
that to say, yeah, all that to say, it all goes back to networking, even protecting your home network.
Mhm.
it does, Pap. And that's why, to go back to what we talked about earlier, as you're studying networking concepts, as you're amassing this knowledge, so much of it is nice and helpful and relevant to your home network, or maybe your parents' home network or friends. There is things that you can use this knowledge for to get very limited real world experience, but the experience that starts to build on each other, because it's not enough just to do it. There's beauty and intricacies in doing it the right way. That's why when we talk about using NAT, right, to where your public IP is exposed, but yet all your internal stuff is natted behind this firewall that people can't necessarily get to. And so and when you talked about, okay, well, people, if you're afraid of your public IP being compromised, we really have to ask yourself, if you were a bad guy or girl, what's the payoff there? That's why it's so easy. I mean, how many times do I tell people, Grant, that if the emails that you got didn't work, why do they keep sending them?
Yep.
I mean, it's easy. But as you watch these crime shows, and a lot of these crime shows, like Trafficked with Mariana Van Zeller, they start to get into these call centers for networking, call centers to try to trick you into doing things. And it's scary, because now you're starting to apply training to the bad guys in the technological world. And when you've got this training and this polish, and it's more than just well, let me send out 1 million emails saying I'm the Prince of Lebanon, and if I can get $1 million from you, then so be it, or whatever. This is turning into okay, well, how can we find out a little bit about you? And we use this relevant information, and that I'm trained to be able to have conversation, which, by the way, one of the biggest things that I think is important in cyber and in networking and in technology is the people skills. The people skills to talk your way into something, to talk to other employees, to talk to your boss, to talk to the people that work for you, to talk to the FBI if you ever have to call them, or whatever. But these people skills that you need, I used to always say, when I was the CIO for MUI, we had a call center, and I always dared myself to show up in a fake uniform
Undercover boss.
and right
Undercover.
in a costume and see if I could talk my way into the computer room.
That'd be cool.
I always wanted to say, do I think I could do this? Do I think I could I could you know, hey, I have to work on the AC, or there's a power issue out, but you can't do those kinds of things without people skills. And
Mhm.
sometimes you need those, like you said, Grant, undercover boss, but sometimes you can use those ways to affirm your security or to affirm your networking or whatever. But I just think that networking is just, outside of it being just really honestly so cool.
Mhm. Yeah,
There's
I just see it as the foundation to a house that you're building, you
absolutely.
know?
Yep. One of my inspirations in cybersecurity, and I reached out to him years ago and heard his story directly from him on LinkedIn, was a guy named Gregory Evans. And he has a very unique story where he was arrested for hacking. I think it was like CNN. He got arrested, and he was just, yeah, he was sitting in jail. And this is him telling me the story. And maybe I'll drop his LinkedIn in case you want to connect and reach out to him. While he was in jail, he was approached by um, personnel. I don't know what kind of people. I don't know if it was FBI. I don't know, just personnel in suits who basically said, "Hey, Fox News just got hit with a bad attack. A lot of their services are offline. Do you know anything? You know how to? Would you know how to fix this?" And he's like, "Maybe. I don't know." And they're like, "Please, if you can fix this, we'll bail you out of jail now." And so they
Dang.
brought him to Fox News, and like he goes and like whatever he does, gets this guy out of their network, restores all their systems, and they're like, "Yeah, your time is up." So they kind of brought him out of jail. Now he's like a public speaker, and he does a lot of like talks and how he, you know, how
But
he
Pat, but Pap, what is that? That's the intersection of, that's the complete junction of networking and cybersecurity, because you know a cyber event has happened, but you're using networking knowledge to fight the bad guy, right? Or
yep,
to the bad guys or whatever. You've got to know those two things. One of the most notorious hackers of all time, Kevin Mitnick, is probably the most notorious of all
the
time.
dumpster diver. Yes.
He parlayed his knowledge and serving time in jail to creating Know Before, which was a security awareness training, among other things, security training and all
Yep.
kinds. So I actually use that product, but that's a complete, hey, sometimes when you get on the wrong side, you can become so notorious that now all of a sudden you've created a job for yourself on the complete other side to be a good guy.
Yep.
So,
It's funny.
but
I also use Know Before as well.
oh, it's wonderful. It's
But
fantastic. But you've got to know how to solve your cybersecurity problems. You need networking to understand how to solve those problems. It's just required, I think.
Yeah, I
yep.
work in this in the industry, so and we're averaging maybe like 4 new cases a day of these major companies getting hacked. But I had the honor of working with the DFIR team, the forensics team, and they allowed me to go look at all the files to see how these threat actors get in and what they do. And 99.9% of the time it's phishing email, somebody in the company. But they don't, the first thing they do is they run Wireshark, Angry IP Scanner to know where they are in the network because they don't know where. That and seeing Wireshark and using it in your class, Professor Dan, I can kind of get into the mind of the hacker and say, okay, so he's probably looking, okay, whose network am I in? Am I in a low privileged person? Can I work my way through this network to get higher privileges and Privesk my way to admin so that I can completely take over their network? And it's just it's so cool to see it in real time and to get into work in it and taking the knowledge that I've learned from your class to read these files that as an intern I probably shouldn't have access to, but I do anyway. So
But Grant, when you pull up Wireshark and you're looking at this screen, you're seeing all this network traffic, it's so intimidating, right?
it really is.
Where do I start? What am I looking for? There's so much stuff. There's so many other conversations. Well, you can filter into the conversation you're trying to hone in on, right? You could look for certain things. You can focus on a layer. You can focus on only IP addresses if that's what you want to look at. But it is such an important tool. Another story, one of my favorite, it wasn't Wireshark, it was another product, but it was the same thing to capture network product. I went to a training class a long time ago. So we're learning how to use this network capture product. And at the time, Hotmail was not encrypted. So we're sitting in this training class with 15 people. And so we're all on the same flat network and we're opening, we're capturing data. All of us are wide open. I can see what everybody else is doing, whatever. And all of a sudden I'm looking and I see Hotmail traffic and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I click on the packet and all of a sudden I'm reading this guy's email to his girlfriend. And I look up because I don't know who did it. And all of a sudden it looked like gophers. Someone else looks up like, and so it's like, without saying anything, you're like, oh my gosh, I think he just read the Hotmail traffic too. And it's just kind of like, holy smokes, do the people not know we're all capturing this data? What are you doing? So anyway,
That's an L.
it is, but capturing network data and using that analysis as one of your tools, that's another thing you have to have, right? Cable making, network traffic analysis. You form these tools that, guess what, we're all doing. And I'm not trying to say that I'm the only person doing this, but in my class, you're being exposed to these different tools, things that I did in my career, things that I believe you will, as a networker or maybe even a cyber that needs this network knowledge that you'll do in your career. It's important to build on these foundations because, again, how shiny do you want your gold badge to be? You know what I mean? I mean, why are we doing this? Are we doing this to be as good as we can be at what we're doing? If you do that, and without delivering such an incredibly crazy lecture right now, if you try to pursue this field, whether it's cyber or networking or whatever, if you're technically curious and you enjoy what you're doing and you keep searching for this knowledge and you just can't get enough, it's like drinking from a fire hose. The success and the compensation and the promotions, all of that will follow, right? You never stop. You never stop honing your skills. You never stop trying to have better people skills and talking to people and all this kind of thing. But you just want your toolbox to be so incredibly powerful that you kind of know how to tackle anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just before I came into your class, I spent the entire Christmas break with code. I think we have to mention code every single episode, Pap.
Yeah, it's everyone knows what code is. Code is the reason why we have this podcast.
Honestly. And we were doing Hack the Box and different things, and he would go, "Oh, Python listens on this port or whatever," and he knows all these port numbers. He knows exactly how these port numbers work. He's like, "You have to use this to open up this port scanner so that you can do this, that, and the other." And I'm like, "How do you know this?" He's like, "Oh, my dad works for Cisco, so I just study a lot of networking." And I was like, "Oh my God." And at that moment, it kind of clicked. And then getting in your class, I was like, I have to pay attention to this, to this.
Grant, you just said it. Port scanning is one of the older, more traditional attack vectors, right, in the cyber world. Port scanning. Well, what does that mean?
Honestly.
What are you scanning? What ports are you scanning? What's a port?
What's a port?
Yeah,
what's a port?
What is? Yep, you need to know.
I mean, that's networking right there. Is if you told me, well, dude, of course we were able to attack that company because they had port so and so open, and I'm like, yeah, port open.
Duh, honestly.
Port, yeah.
Who didn't know
I
that?
don't know what that means.
Right, you've got to know what that means and why, and that's why sometimes the best defense is really good offense. If you know how to attack people, if you know how you would do it, then in a way, if you're entrusted with defending a castle, you know how to protect your castle from attacks. So
Mhm.
anyway, I think and I'm sorry to expound upon it, but you just hit it with the port scanning is people say that. How many people are walking around? Yeah, port scanners. What's a port scanner? Oh, I don't
Port
know.
443, port
Exactly.
80,
So,
Yeah,
twenty-one and
I think
22.
but perfect
I,
example.
I laugh when you mention the Python. So Python by default listens on port 8000. I think
Hmm.
that was what Cope might
Yeah,
have
yeah.
said.
He's like,
Yeah,
pick a random
so
port. Picked
right. So if I
8,000.
ran, yeah, if I open my shell and typed in, Python 3 dash M HTTP dash dot server, it's going to open a server listener on port 8000 by default, unless I specify a different port. Um, so funny you mention that. When I first learned that, it was at a smaller company. They were, bragging about being an all Python shop. And then I had just learned this information from like one of those cybrary.it or something like that, some website. And so I asked out of curiosity, just curious, what port are you guys running your web services on port 8000? And they're like, yeah, why? I was like, well, I just learned that hackers look for that port when they're looking for Python web server. So maybe we want to change that.
Unless they don't know networking,
Unless
Pat,
they don't
because
know
then we're
that.
then we're okay if they don't know
Right.
networking.
Yeah, then we're good.
It was so funny. Pat, he's like, oh yeah, pick a port to open up this port scan listener, and I was like, okay, 8,000. He's like, oh no, don't pick that one. That's Python. I was like,
But yep.
wait, why does that matter? Like, it was just so confusing to me. And
That guys right there that's the if you did word association and you said importance of networking in cyber, you could just say port scanning. I mean, and that that to me describes the whole argument right there. You can't protect against that, or you can't attack with those methods if you don't understand what it is you're doing and why with ports. And so ports, as you know, Grant, is a big part of our class. They're a big
yep,
part of one of our chapters. So
and Net Plus too. Net
yeah,
Plus too.
exactly. I believe it. So, but I mean, and guys, outside of that, sometimes I just get really geeky and hope some of my cybersecurity students will be like, I might actually just try to pursue networking, to which I'm like, yeah, you
You did
will.
it.
Yeah, you will. So,
There's a lot of good money in networking too. I talked to some of the network engineers at my job, and they're pretty happy saying that. So if you're in it for the money, you might want to take a look at
Take a
networking as
look at
well.
it.
and Pap, because in these fields that we're talking about, it's hard. And if it wasn't hard, then everybody
Everyone
would
would do it.
do it. So, but in saying it's hard, if you just relentlessly pursue the knowledge and you just stay technically curious, um, you'll be fine. I really totally in my heart believe that, because I mean, I just look back at my networking career and I'm just so thankful. I mean, I'm very thankful and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Awesome. And I want to bring it all back together. Professor Dan, your story of your journey is incredible and it's very unique. And I remember the first day of class, you told us, my goal is to get fired. I don't have to be here. I I want to be here, and it definitely showed in your teaching. Because I mean, after you retired, you were like, I don't know what to do, and it definitely shows that you just genuinely cared in your class, and that's probably why so many people enjoy it. And
Now, Pap, to just quickly expound on what Grant just said about wanting to get fired. My point is I want all of my students to be wildly successful in my class, to where people audit my test scores and say, we got to get rid of this
he's
professor
cheating.
because all of his students are doing really well. And I said, if that ever happens and I get fired, I'm going to be a happy person. But I try to, you know, there are two different ways I believe in teaching a textbook. I could make my students, I could say, here's your chapter and you have to read everything. And I hope you know everything and you don't know what I'm going to test you on. And then you just kind of cram everything you can, you go take the exam and then you dump it. I do it in a way that I highlight the things in my networking journey that I found to be most important. And I really, really emphasize those and I test you on those things. And it's still difficult. It's difficult material. But there are lots of things in a college textbook that aren't as important as the others, especially when it comes to networking. So I kind of take it on the approach that I'm going to consistently teach you what I believe to be the most valuable topics and the most valuable things that you should know, and hold you accountable to knowing those and learning those. And my hope is that you carry that with you through your career, and especially in your cyber classes, your upper division cyber classes. But um, I just, guys, I'm very lucky and I'm very thankful. And I mean, I don't know if I'll ever retire again someday, but I love what I do, and teaching, being a network evangelist, if you will,
Oh,
is
absolutely.
it's just a wonderful gift to me.
One last thing I kind of wanted to add to this is I spent so much time in Professor Dan's office over that summer break, and he not just for networking advice and job advice, also for life advice. And just talking to him so much, it kind of I was like, man, how cool would it be if I got Professor Dan and Dr. Glenn Dietrich to kind of sit down and just bounce ideas off each other and just talk about networking. And that was kind of like the forming idea of this podcast. And I was like, okay, well, what if I bring it to PAP and then maybe one day we can have Professor Dan on? And like, here it is. This is the full circle moment for me, at least, to to
Oh
have
yeah.
this. So,
I will.
Professor Dan, if you didn't know, you're the seed that blossomed this tree. So,
Started. Yeah, I didn't do much. Grant just messaged me and said, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And I said, pick a date. And he's like, what? I was like, if we don't pick a date, we'll never do it. We pick a
yeah,
date and we do it. And so we started this up. But I know we're pretty much on time here. I wanted to ask one last question for you, Professor. If you had to give, at least one more piece of advice for all of our viewers watching, a lot of college people, maybe there are people who are already in the field. There are people who haven't, there are even high schoolers who haven't made it to college yet, who are still, who are looking to get into either cyber, networking, computer science, whatever field they might get into. If you had one piece of advice to give them throughout their journey, what would you leave them with, or what would you say to leave them with on this episode?
Well, I would say that you have a lot of learning ahead of you, um, for many different topics that are going to be in your core, like you have to take political science, you have to take math, you have to take a foreign language. The whole point of college is taking these courses to understand what it is that you like and what you're passionate about. And if you're lucky enough to be someone like me who knows that you're interested in technology, and you know that when you go to a technology, when you sign up for a technology class, that's going to be the highlight of your day, right? Like for me, I hated history. I didn't like history until I saw Hamilton. So you can imagine how long it was that I hated history. But when I walked into a technology class, even if it was database or something that I didn't love, that's technology. And that I was going to get excited because I knew I was going to learn something. So when I see students not attending class in their major, or shortchanging that extra step of knowledge of something in their major, that's not the time to do that, right? That's why we're here. So don't discount the passion and the ability to go all in when it's a cyber class or a
mhm.
networking class or a Python class or something like that. You're going to watch YouTube videos. If you don't know, hey, how again does DNS work so that I resolve a website, so that I actually land on the web server somewhere around the world that's going to serve that content? Don't be afraid to go to YouTube and search for that in-depth video with cool animation, right?
Power cert,
Animation that's better,
power
right?
cert.
Mr. Power Cert, things that I don't have the time to sit down and do, but there's so many resources out there. Don't just, lump it all into one big, oh, well, I read enough. I don't want to see how DNS works. But that's the gold of what we're doing. That's, I see students post on LinkedIn, they set up their own home labs or they do this kind of thing. It's that technical curiosity. That's the word I keep referring to and referring to. And if you have that technical curiosity, if you're on this never-ending climb, right, where like, hey, I know I'm going to be climbing that ladder for many years, but you know what? That's the journey I'm going to be on, and we're always going to try to better ourselves, and we're always going to try to learn so that we're always ready. We're ready when that job comes open and it's like, hey, we're looking for someone who has a little bit of experience in here, a little bit of experience here, and you're like, well, you know what, through some of the things I've done, maybe it's informal, maybe it's formal, I have that. So just dive into it. And it's like, it's the last thing I'm going to say, Pap, about this. It's like dating. I can talk myself out, right, of anything. I can come up with a million reasons why I shouldn't go call that girl that gave me her number, or whatever. I mean, thankfully I'm married and I don't have to deal with this anymore. But at the time, like, there's a lot of opportunity to talk yourself out of something. What if you just talked yourself into something one time? What if you just believed? What if you just allowed yourself to say, hey, you know what? This technology stuff is pretty cool. And whether I take a slow route, whether I get certifications, whether I get some experience, whether I'm working in the geek squad, whether I'm just going to people, I start my own little stupid business that I charge people $1 to review their home network and just make sure it's secure, or whatever it is I do. Or you go to the student organizations that are there to benefit you on campus, to interact with other people. There's so many ways to dive into this and to fall in love with it. And yes, I know it's work, and I know that you're going to have some tough days. But that's what I want my own children to do, is to enjoy what they do. And I'm not going to give you a million of those sayings, right? But work is hard enough. Let's just try to enjoy it. And to me, there's nothing better than technology. And I love networking. So my final advice to anybody who's listening to this that isn't sure of whether technology is for them, if you want to know how things work and why, I can assure you technology is for you. You just have to, well, in the spirit of the holidays, you just have to believe.
I knew that was coming.
I'd print, if I could show the gold ticket that was punched, right? I would show it right now.
Damn.
Grant, you might have to like edit words at the top, like believe.
Oh man. If you just, it's like it's easier when you enjoy something. Everything is easier when you enjoy it. And technology is such a gift. It's always changing, it's always evolving. If you're left behind when it comes to technology, it's because of you. It's not because of technology, because there's always something new, always something to learn, always something different. So I just can't imagine a better field. And for all the women that are listening, please, please, please don't give up on this. We need more uh, diversity in thinking. We need more people that look like, right? I mean, if there were more, how come every time I see a hacker picture, I don't see a ponytail? I want to see a hacker picture, the stupid animation of the hackers. I want to see ponytails or long hair or whatever. I mean, we
Not the
just
hoodie.
need, no, with the hoodie, I want to see the hair, the flowing hair. We just need, we need more diversity. We need more variety. We need different thoughts. We need people working together. We need it to look like the way society looks, please. It's so important. And despite what you may think, there's lots of people, me included, that desperately want and need this. So very passionate about it. And Pap, I know that was a long answer, and I apologize, but again,
No, I
um,
I loved it, and I'm sure people will love it too. And I love the mention of women in tech, the inclusion. I know we're pretty much at time, but last thing I'll say is one of my uh favorite people to work with happened to be a woman. She was, she had just, this was probably about like 5 years ago. She had just started as a cyber analyst. I was a cyber engineer. She had started in my, I got promoted. She had started in the job I got promoted from. And so naturally, my boss basically pinged me and said, "Hey, can you train her? You know, I basically just want her to learn everything that you learned in a position and to be able to do it well." He allocated about 2 weeks. It only took me a week of teaching her these things, and she just caught. She was so fast at catching on that 6 months in, when I went back to check on her, and like I had all these processes set up and like how things were working. I went back to check on her, and not only did she take my processes, but she improved it to the point where she showed me, and I was like, "Whoa, like this is way better than I could have done."
Awesome.
And so, like, I learned at that point, like, wow, we need more women. They're the ones who can improve things that we do. They're just don't give up. If you're a woman in tech, just don't give up. I think we absolutely need you. We need that kind of diversity and everything.
Definitely.
Great.
Um, all
Man,
right,
I've been
that was the episode
that
two
was
for
it.
season two.
What an incredible
Um,
one.
Again, if you listen to this once, I'm gonna just let you know you're gonna have to rewind and listen to
Loop
this
it.
again. You're gonna have
Loop
to
it
just
again.
loop it. Every through your career, every day. If you feel discouraged, this is that episode.
This is the
Listen
one.
again.
I'm
Professor
telling
Dan.
Pap too. I'm telling Pap all week, like this is
And,
gonna be the change.
Yep.
and guys, everything's hard, right? I mean, it's not, there's no magic solution, but the hard is what makes it great. We all know that, right? We all know that. So please,
Challenge is
anybody,
what
yeah, don't get discouraged. Stay with it. If you enjoy it, there's plenty that awaits you. There's plenty of good. Just stay with
absolutely. That's the that couldn't have been said better. I mean,
it.
what better closing words? I don't have them.
Same. Same. Again, if you love the podcast, make sure you subscribe, like, comment. We read the comments. Shout out to DIY Sec. We read your comment. Rooting for you, Grant, on the certification you're going to get Network Plus. So
Absolutely.
we'll be doing an update when you get that
Hmm?
certification soon.
Professor Dan, did
Uh,
you have links or something that people can reach out if they had questions for you? Did you want to promote yourself in any way? I mean, your LinkedIn, your want us to put in the description or anything like that?
Yeah, I can definitely share some of that stuff. I'd love to help. If anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn, I don't generally connect with people I don't know unless they're from the university. So if you message me, just please indicate that you saw this podcast, and that way
Mhm.
I know, it's not just, because I just don't like to connect with
A bunch of
anybody that I just
randos.
don't, right, a bunch of random things because I prefer quality over quantity. But if you watch the podcast, I'd be more than happy to connect. And if there's anything I can do to help, it really would be my pleasure.
Excellent.
oh, that's
And
awesome. We'll link Professor Dan's LinkedIn in the description, so you'll be able to see that. I think that concludes it. We are good to go.
that was a great episode.
So
That's
again, thanks for
excellent.
watching. We'll see you in the next one.
Paper trail out.